Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're tuning in, you're obviously looking for that shortcut to being well-informed, and well, today's deep dive is definitely tailored for your curiosity.
Oh, absolutely.
We are taking a stack of really intense, unconventional source material and extracting these hidden insights you probably didn't even know you're looking for. So imagine waking up at 3 in the morning.
Ugh, the worst time.
Right, but not from a nightmare.
Yep.
And not because you, suddenly remembered a deadline. Your body is physically compelling you to write.
Wow.
The urge is so visceral, it literally pulls you straight out of deep sleep. And you aren't just journaling your feelings, you are mapping out these highly intricate concepts about physics, mathematics, time, and, of all things, ancient biblical law.
Yeah, that compulsion overrides every basic biological need for rest. I mean, it's a physical drive to physically manifest the information that's just trapped in your mind.
Exactly. And that is the daily reality for Catherine Hall. She is a 51-year-old South African author, and she doesn't have any formal university education.
Right, which makes it even more fascinating.
Yeah, yet she produces these texts that have a density that scholars usually spend decades trying to cultivate. She attributes all of this entirely to divine inspiration. She acknowledges that these writings, they just transcend her natural capacity.
She's basically driven to test the structural, almost scientific integrity of these ancient scriptures.
Yes, and the specific document we're looking at for you today is her 2021 text, and it's titled The Law of the Altar of Earth.
And, the format of this document is just incredibly telling. It's this dense, meticulously handwritten page of study notes.
Literally handwritten.
Yeah, completely. But Catherine is actually archiving the deeply personal spiritual journey of a family member. His name is Jacques.
Okay.
Through these notes, Jacques is, he's meditating on ancient biblical laws from the book of Exodus, specifically chapters 20 and 21. He's using this really old legal code to map out his own internal boundaries.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission today is to follow Catherine and Jacques' lead here. We're going to explore how these seemingly archaic ancient laws actually hold up to modern analysis, because, we're looking past the literal rules. Neither of us currently manages a farm of livestock, right?
Speak to yourself. No, I'm kidding. I definitely did.
Yeah. So we want to extract the underlying modern blueprints for community, ethics, and really authenticity.
And to do that, we kind of have to look at the architecture Catherine builds in the margins before Jacques even gets to the laws themselves.
Oh, the margin notes are wild.
They really are. She anchors the text with these incredibly precise definitions. Like, she defines rabbi by its ancient Hebrew root as my master.
Right, not just a teacher.
Exactly. And she breaks down Israel into Sarah, which means to retain God or become rigid, and El, which means God. Then she links it to Yashar, meaning to be upright.
That's a lot of layers.
It is. She even maps the 12 tribes back to 4 matriarchs. So you got Leah, Rachel, Zilpah, and Bilhah.
Which, honestly, that completely shifts the perspective before you read a single law on the page. She isn't just setting some historical scene. She is defining the psychological state of the people who originally received these laws.
Yes.
By defining rabbi as a master rather than just, a casual teacher, it requires the reader to adopt this posture of absolute submission to the text.
Exactly. It creates this framework of intentionality. Jacques isn't just casually browsing these chapters on a Sunday afternoon. He's treating them as psychological and spiritual schematic.
Yeah. So let's get into the first part of that schematic. The notes start with the laws concerning the altar of earth.
Right.
The text states that God requested a really simple altar made of natural earth or not hewn stones, meaning if you used tools to carve or shape the stone, you, quote, profaned it. Furthermore, there could be no steps leading up to the altar to prevent a person's nakedness from being exposed. And I have to admit, this initially threw me a bit.
Really? How so?
Well, when you picture a divine altar, you usually picture gold, marble, this elaborate craftsmanship. Why demand dirt and just unshaped rocks?
Well, you have to look at the mechanism of what an altar actually is. It represents the point of connection between humanity and the divine. So by banning tools, the text is essentially banning artificial manipulation.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Catherine's notes frame this as integrity in the small things. The very moment you take a chisel to the stone, you're injecting your own ego into the equation.
Wow, yeah.
You're trying to control how the stone is perceived rather than just accepting what the stone fundamentally is.
It's a total rejection of the curated self.
Precisely.
I mean, if you were listening to this right now on your commute or, sitting at your desk, just think about the sheer amount of energy we spend tooling our image today.
It's exhausting.
It is. The ancient hewn stone is the exact equivalent of our modern social media filters, or our rehearsed corporate jargon, or like the carefully manicured personas we wear to dinner parties. We constantly want to present this polished, flawless marble version of ourselves.
Because we operate under this assumption that the raw, untooled earth is it's unacceptable.
Right. We're terrified.
We fear that the divine, or our community, or even, honestly, our own spouses, will reject us unless we chisel away all our rough edges.
Yeah.
The profound modern takeaway from Jacques' meditation here is that approaching your true self requires zero metaphorical makeup. The required state for genuine connection is the raw, untooled version of your identity.
I love that. And the prohibition against steps is an even sharper metaphor, I think. No steps, lest your nakedness be exposed.
It's so visceral.
It really is. Like, if I build an artificial elevation, if I put myself on a pedestal that I constructed just to look more impressive, I actually make myself incredibly vulnerable.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the higher you climb on an artificial platform, the more of your underbelly you expose to all the people below you.
Right, because artificial elevation inherently compromises your grounding. A pedestal requires constant balance. You're constantly defending it.
Always playing defense, yeah.
But when you operate from the natural earth, there's no place to fall from. And there's nothing hidden beneath you to be exposed. It's just a brilliant physical demand for psychological humility.
Okay, so if we establish that Jacques is using this unhewn altar to represent an internal state of absolute unpolished honesty, how does that internal blueprint dictate our tangible responsibilities to the world?
Because it has to translate, right?
Exactly. An honest internal life has to translate to external action. And that brings us to a section of the notes that is notoriously difficult for modern readers.
Oh, the animal control laws.
Yes, the animal control laws, specifically the rules regarding the goring ox.
Yeah, these are intense.
The text is shockingly specific. It says if an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox is stoned and its flesh cannot be eaten.
Right.
The owner, however, is acquitted. But there's a caveat. If the ox tended to thrust with its horn in time past, and the owner was warned but didn't confine it,
And they're in trouble.
big trouble. Both the ox and the owner are put to death. Now, stoning an ox and refusing to eat the meat feels incredibly wasteful to me, and honestly, a bit barbaric.
It does seem that way at first glance.
Right. Because in an ancient agrarian society, losing an ox and just wasting all that protein is total economic devastation. What is the underlying logic there?
Well, the economic devastation is precisely the point. The mechanism of forbidding the meat creates this really powerful societal taboo.
Okay.
If a community eats the meat of an animal that killed a human, they are extracting value from human death.
Oh, wow.
They're essentially metabolizing the violence.
Right.
So by mandating that the animal be stoned and left uneaten, the law forces the community to recognize the absolute sanctity of human life. It ensures no one secretly benefits from a tragedy.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because it's easy to dismiss some ancient farmer dealing with a violent ox, but translate the core principle here.
Let's do it.
How is an owner who knows his ox thrusts with its horn any different from a modern automotive corporation that discovers, say, a deadly defect in their steering columns, but decides to hide the data and avoid a recall just to save money?
It's the exact same thing.
Yeah.
The parallel is exact. Catherine's notes extract a concept here that she calls radical responsibility.
Radical responsibility.
Yeah. The text makes a surgical distinction between an unforeseeable tragedy and the ownership of negligence.
Right, because an unpredictable ox is just an act of nature.
Exactly. But choosing to ignore a known threat, that is complicity. Radical responsibility dictates that you aren't merely held accountable for the harm you intentionally inflict. You are equally accountable for the harm your inaction allows to occur.
So if you know there is a danger within your sphere of influence, whether that is a dangerous pet or, I don't know, a toxic workplace culture you manage.
It's a faulty product you manufacture.
Right, you hold moral liability for the outcome.
And you can take that a step further into how the text handles property disputes between citizens.
Right, the ox versus ox scenario.
Yes. If one person's ox kills another person's ox, the law dictates they sell the live animal, split the money evenly, and then split the dead animal evenly.
Which sounds so strangely mathematical.
It is. But you have to consider the economic fragility of these early tribal cultures. If one family loses their only ox, they lose their ability to plow.
Which means they starve.
They starve, or they become indentured to their neighbors, and that creates generational wealth disparity and deep-seated tribal resentment.
So by forcing them to split the live and the dead ox, the law imposes an immediate mathematical equilibrium.
Yes, equilibrium.
Nobody walks away totally ruined, and nobody walks away profiting from their neighbor's disaster. It forces the community to share the burden of random misfortune.
Which prevents the fragmentation of the community. Jacques is meditating on a system designed to keep a society from eating itself from the inside out over resource disputes.
Wow. Dealing with negligent property damage is one layer of the social contract. But Jacques' notes also force us to confront what happens when human beings bypass negligence and intentionally inflict violence on one another.
Yeah, it gets much darker.
It does. This leads us into the laws concerning human conflict and servitude. And it features probably the most infamous phrase in ancient legal history.
Rex talionis. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth.
Right. And when you hear that today, the immediate reaction is repulsion. It sounds like a mandate for some brutal dystopian bloodbath.
Absolutely.
Like, if you blind me, I am legally obligated to blind you. How does Jacques reconcile that sheer brutality with a spiritual pursuit of ethics?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the historical context entirely flips our modern assumption. Lex talionis was never a mandate for vengeance.
Really?
Never. It was actually the world's first legal ceiling on retaliation.
Oh, a ceiling, not a floor.
Exactly. You have to understand the sociological mechanics of ancient nomadic tribes prior to this law.
Right.
Back then, justice was entirely dictated by power. So if a poor person accidentally injured a wealthy chieftain, the chieftain wouldn't just hurt the poor person back. He might slaughter the poor person's entire extended family just to make a point.
So the retaliation escalated based on the victim's social status and ego rather than the actual crime.
Right. Blood feuds could consume multiple generations over a single stolen goat or a broken arm.
That's terrifying.
It was chaos. Lex talionis instituted a revolutionary standard of proportionality. It established a firm boundary that said the punishment must fit the crime, and it cannot exceed it.
So you cannot take a life for an eye.
Exactly. You cannot seize a family's land for a knocked-out tooth. It basically stripped the emotion and the ego out of justice, replacing it with an objective limit.
That completely changes how I read that. And you actually see that same objective limitation applied to the deeply uncomfortable topic of servitude in the text.
Yes, the servant laws.
The notes outline that a Hebrew servant serves for 6 years, and in the 7th year they go free, owing absolutely nothing. But if a servant loves his master's family and chooses to stay forever, they go before a judge. The master then uses an awl to pierce the servant's ear to the doorpost.
And the choice of the doorpost is highly symbolic. The doorpost represents the threshold of the home. It's the boundary marker of the family's identity and their protection.
Right.
So by piercing the ear to that specific piece of wood, the servant is permanently grafting themselves onto the household. It ceases to be a mere economic transaction. It becomes a permanent integration into the family structure.
It's intense, but the rules governing how these servants are treated establish a shocking baseline for human rights.
They really do.
Because the text dictates that if a master strikes a servant and destroys their eye or even just knocks out a tooth, the servant immediately goes free for the sake of that body part.
Yeah.
And in neighboring ancient cultures, a servant was sheer property. A master destroying their servant's eye was viewed the exact same way as a farmer breaking his own plow. It was just his property to destroy.
But the mechanism of this biblical law completely upends that property dynamic. It declares that bodily autonomy and human dignity supersede any financial contract or economic investment.
Which is huge for that time period.
It's massive. The moment the master violates the physical boundary of the servant, the economic contract is instantly voided. The master absorbs a total financial loss, and the servant walks away liberated.
It is a radical assertion that every single human being possesses an intrinsic, non-negotiable value. Like, if you violate that bottom line dignity, even over something as small as a tooth, you completely forfeit your power over them.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the reason Jacques spent his time archiving these specific chapters becomes incredibly clear. I mean, he isn't compiling a list of trivial ancient restrictions. He is studying a comprehensive blueprint for sustainable human coexistence.
He is building an ethical architecture.
Exactly. Whether he is looking at the unhewn altar demanding internal authenticity, or the goring ox demanding proactive responsibility for negligence, or lex talionis, limiting our human instinct for infinite revenge, or the servant laws establishing the baseline of human dignity. It all points to a singular reality. You simply cannot maintain a healthy internal life without rigorous honesty, and you cannot maintain a healthy society without a universally applied rule of law that protects the vulnerable from the powerful.
So what does this all mean for you listening? You might be dealing with a daily crush of information overload, navigating a world where ethics often feel entirely subjective and community feels deeply fractured.
It feels like that a lot lately.
It does. And Catherine Hall set out to see if these divinely inspired texts could withstand rigorous modern analysis. What Jacques' notes reveal is that they do way more than just withstand analysis. They offer incredibly sturdy tools for modern survival.
Yeah, they really do.
In a culture obsessed with polished steps and curated personas, demand the unhewn stone of yourself. Take radical ownership not just of your actions, but of the harm you allow to happen through your inaction.
Require proportional justice.
Exactly. And fiercely protect the bottom line dignity of the people around you.
It's a framework that really cuts through the modern noise. It provides a grounded, unhewn foundation in a society that is constantly trying to sell us artificial elevation.
Beautifully said. And as we wrap up this deep dive into Catherine Hall's source material, I want to leave you with one final thought to explore on your own. At the beginning, we mentioned that her intense midnight writing sessions don't just cover biblical law.
Right, they cover a lot more.
Yeah, she also writes intricate, complex concepts regarding physics.
The fundamental mechanics governing the universe.
Right. So think about Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction.
Classic physics.
It is the baseline demand for equilibrium in physics. Now, look back at the strict mathematical boundaries of these ancient behavioral laws we just talked about.
Oh, wow, I see where you're going with this.
An eye for an eye limits the reaction to match the action perfectly. The exact 50-50 splitting of a dead ox and a live ox forcibly restores the financial equilibrium of two neighbors.
That's wild to think about.
Is it possible that these ancient legal codes weren't just sociological constructs to keep nomadic tribes from killing each other? Could this strict, measured demand for behavioral balance actually be an early spiritual expression of the fundamental laws of physics playing out in human morality?
That is a fascinating thought.
It really leaves you wondering if the rules that govern the stars are the exact same rules meant to govern the human heart.